Conservatives.
Has their story. And the story that I'm hearing right now is that people feel like they're losing control of their lives. Whether it's the young couple living in their parents' basement even though they're 30 years old because they can't afford an $800,000 house and are calculating that they may never be able to own a home. Whether it's the immigrant who comes here as a doctor but is blocked by a bureaucracy from ever doing that job or getting a license to practice. Whether it's the First Nations community that wants to harvest its resources to lift itself out of poverty but is blocked by government gatekeepers. Mr. Speaker, or more recently, whether it is the countless small business people who've been flattened by endless lockdowns and rules that often seem to have no link to science, or whether it is the trucker who has been dutifully putting the goods and services in our communities on our shelves and on our kitchen tables, and now is called names and prevented from doing his or her job by a Prime Minister who's not interested in listening. Now, I am vaccinated and I encourage others to do so, but every person has their story. They have their reasons. They might be medical reasons, cultural reasons. They might even have learned, they might have had an unfortunate medical experience with prior medical prescriptions that have prevented them from making that decision. But that decision must be theirs. Their bodies belong to them. They are masters of their own decisions. And instead of listening to these people, the Prime Minister has insulted them and name-called them and left them with no choice but to engage in legitimate and peaceful protest. If he wants to put an end to those protests, if he wants to actually reunite the country, then he should do what others have begun doing, because freedom is on the march in this country. Saskatchewan, Alberta, Prince Edward Island, and Quebec are beginning to lift these restrictions. At midnight in Alberta, the vaccine passport came to an end, and people across the country are showing their support for starting freedom in this country, including two of the Prime Minister's own members of Parliament. Mr. Speaker, let's get these restrictions out of the way. Let's open up our economy. Let's bring back freedom. Let's make Canadians the authors of their own stories again.
Questions and comments. Questions et commentaires. L'honorable secrétaire parlementaire.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, I note that when the member was speaking, he talked about the protest outside being a peaceful protest. What we do know is that there have been many incidences of non-peaceful type activities that have been occurring. As a matter of fact, a number of his colleagues in the Conservative bench have also called out what's going on outside as an occupation. And I'm curious if he wants to comment as to whether or not he agrees that we should be asking those that are outside to leave now that they've made their point, or if he thinks that what's going on outside is totally legitimate and should continue in its current form.
The Honourable Member for Carleton.
I don't want any of this to continue. In fact, the truckers themselves have said they will not stay here 1 minute longer than the Prime Minister continues to impose against the freedoms of Canadians. And as for him insulting the people who've spoken up, I encourage him to listen to his own Member of Parliament, the member for Quebec, a Liberal MP, who said that when he went to the protest, he saw a very kind grandmother who demonstrated for her grandkids. She looked and sounded nothing like a white supremacist, nor did the Black, Sikh, and Indigenous Canadians I saw demonstrating on my way to Parliament Hill these last 2 weeks, or in Quebec City this last Saturday. I have enough respect for my fellow Canadians not to engage in these easy and absurd labels.
Questions et commentaires. Questions and comments. L'honorable député de Lac-Saint-Jean.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank my honourable colleague for his speech. I would never want him to be quiet. I always listen attentively when he speaks because he's one of my favorites. Now, we agree on one thing. It's that the government management of the crisis has been awful. We all agree on this. No leadership. We can see that, and I totally agree with my colleague on that point. Now, some of his Conservative colleagues have asked for the immediate end to the blockade in Ottawa? And which side is he in favor of? The Honourable Member for Carleton. I would like to thank the Honourable Member for his question. My position is for freedom. I want to end the government obstruction that this government is imposing on Canadians. That means ending mandatory vaccination, give jobs back to legitimate public servants who were fired because of their vaccine status, eliminate the obligation to be vaccinated for truckers who want to deliver products to us, to our grocery stores, restore freedom to Canadians above all. That would bring an end to the protests, and it will help us to start working to make Canada the freest country in the world. Questions and comments?
The Honourable Member for Cowichan, Malahat, Langford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and allow me to congratulate the member for Carleton on his upcoming coronation as leader of the Conservative Party. You know, he talked, the irony here, of course, is that these lockdown protests have themselves caused some of the worst lockdowns in the last 2 years. And he referred to unhappy stories. Well, I've got a few too, Mr. Speaker. I've got unhappy stories from workers and businesses in downtown Ottawa who have been unable to open or go to work. Unhappy stories from truckers who are stuck at Coots and stuck at Windsor because of these protests. Workers who are trying to move goods across the border and provide necessary supplies to our communities. I'm asking, Mr. Speaker, through you, will the member for Carleton speak up for those people and make sure that their unhappy stories are listened to by the rest of his caucus and encourage these protests to end?
In 30 seconds or so, the Honourable Member for Carleton.
One person is responsible for this mess, and that's the Prime Minister. That's right. He caused this mess by attacking Canadian citizens and taking away their freedoms. The rest of the world is moving on. Other countries all around the world are lifting restrictions. Provinces across the country are doing exactly the same, but we've got this holdout. The Prime Minister is hunkering down, and out of spite and personal pride, refusing to lift these unjustified and unscientific restrictions. If he would only do so, then the truckers could get back to work and the other protesters could go back to their lives and everything in Canada would get back up on its feet and we could get back to working on giving people control of their lives.